we know what you've been thinking since last Wednesday. Because we've been thinking it, a lot of people have been thinking this, is what we saw the start of potential civil war here in America.
And we have already shown you just today, these state capitals, these counties, people are talking about violence.
Openly talking
About it, openly talking about killing leaders. I've lived a long time now, and I always, Charles, you and I have always talked about this. I always thought the 60s, especially the late 60s, would be the most difficult time in the country's history in my lifetime. That is so not true anymore. It is now, and we might be headed for civil war. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
I thought you were talking the 1860s when you said 60s,
No.
but
Yeah,
yes. So joining us right now is Columbia Professor of History, Stephanie McCurry, and she's also written a few books about the Civil War, so she has some interesting context on what we're going through right now. Professor, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Professor.
Thank you so much.
So, Stephanie, obviously you've seen everything that's been going on. I'm wondering, just based on your deep knowledge of our history, where do you put us today, in terms of this kind of, violence?
The question of where we are right now at this particular moment, what direction this turns, I think you can't rule anything out. And while entering civil war in any sense that we are used to thinking of it is not the most likely possibility right now, again, I would say you can't rule anything out, and everything depends on what happens now and how this opening challenge and act of violence at the Capitol, which is unprecedented. I mean, even in the history of the United States, with all of its history of ideological division and violence, including the kind that led up to and became the Civil War, those were in regional capitals. It was not in the national capital. The violent seizure of power, it was a secessionist movement originally. So I guess to make the point that I think the key point is you can't rule anything out right now, and everything depends on what happens and how this current violence is checked and the perpetrators brought to account.
I hear what you're saying about holding people accountable. There's the other side of the sword on that is that those people who are held accountable get held up as martyrs, and to me, I don't know. That just seems like you have the potential for more violence there, which is not to say they should not be held accountable, but it's ideological. So if you can't convince the other side, if they can't come together on ideology, there's no way to really stop it other than combat.
Yes, there is. And I think that what our history teaches us is that we can't be worrying about martyrs right now. That's what happened after the American Civil War. You have to hold people accountable. You have to remove their impunity, because look at how shocked these people are that they're being arrested or that they're being put on a no-fly zone. Why? Because they're so empowered. They think this is their country. They're taking it back. And I think that what we have to do now to make that they're not going to be converted. And I think what we have to do is to rely far more on accountability, hold them accountable, criminally accountable. And in that sense, self-preservation and calculation about self-interest is far more likely to make a difference, at least in terms of curbing criminal behavior, violent behavior. And we can't expect an ideological conversion. And I don't think this is the moment for worrying about martyrs. I mean, they're going to turn themselves into martyrs no matter what we do. That was the argument about Jefferson Davis, that he was turned into a martyr. That guy he was in jail for 18 months while they decided whether to hold a treason trial. Then he was let go, the president of the Confederacy, and he became a martyr. So, letting people off the hook is the worst possible response to this. This is a backlash to the first Black presidency. It is a backlash to the expansion or the attempt to really deliver on democracy for all citizens of the United States. And what they want and why they carry the Confederate flag is because they believe that the country belongs to them. So the response has to be, it doesn't, and your actions are criminal. and you will be held accountable.
I have to tell you, we're about out of time. And as I listen to you, I happen to agree with you that you have to hold them accountable. At the same time, as you say that, it feels that this kind of violence is inevitable because you have to prosecute, and at the same time, it will energize them. And they feel like America is theirs. And what they say back to you is, it's our country as much as your country, and we're going to impose our values. When you have something like this, I don't see how it doesn't reach a breaking point. Even as you describe it, it worries me more.
This situation is very difficult to think through. I think we still don't know exactly how this went down and what parties were involved. And we're learning more every day, and journalists like you are doing their part by showing all the different connections. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to keep our eye on what's going on in these state legislatures. I mean, I can't ever, this certainly isn't original to me, but it's hard not to think about Michigan and the seizure of the sort of assault on the state house in Michigan. It was like a dress rehearsal for this. And I was so appalled and stunned at the time at how little was done in response to that.
And yet it was repeated in a more shocking way with less security at the Capitol with all this warning. That's crazy.
Absolutely. It was instigated by the president, who called on these paramilitary forces, basically his army, as he always put it, who marched under the flag of the Confederacy and under Trump, which we are now prepared for. We're not even surprised by that anymore. But this was a military attempt to hold on to power when it had been lost at the ballot box. That is an incredibly threatening, unprecedented move in the United States. There's still a really deep strain of white supremacy here. And in that sense, it ties this moment back to the Civil War, in many ways still playing out the same agonistic struggle over what kind of democracy and society we are, and who's going to have human rights and the rights, full rights of citizens, and the protections of citizens within it. So in that sense, we've been in this struggle since this nation was founded, and it's not clear yet what this particular moment is. Certainly cannot rule out your point of view that it's the prelude to another civil war.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for your insight on this. It's something that I think millions of Americans are really thinking about right now for obvious reasons. Yeah. I think your books are very timely now. Confederate Reckoning, Power and Politics in the Civil War, and Women's War, Fighting and Surviving the American Civil War. So thank you so much for that context. And I suspect we will be talking to you again.
Thank you so much, Professor.
Thanks so much.
Really appreciate the time.
Thank you.